In a political showdown that shook the internet, two powerful voices clashed in a battle that was anything but ordinary. One armed with data and the sharpness of experience, the other with emotion and passion that captivated millions. What happens when a seasoned political star faces off against a global pop icon on live TV? But before we dive into this story, I want to hear from you. Comment down below, where in the world are you watching from? Let's light up this comment section. And hey, if you love stories with high drama, power shifts, and the kind of moments that leave people speechless, you're in the right place. Tap that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter in these powerful, untold stories. The Great American Debate gave us a front row seat to a showdown between Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary, and Taylor Swift, a superstar known for using her platform to fight for social causes. In this video, we're diving into the heart of a fiery debate that went viral. Karoline Leavitt hilariously dismantles Taylor Swift's arguments on women's rights, misinformation, and climate change. What did the debate reveal about the power of data versus emotion, and how did each of them make their mark on the political and cultural landscape? From sharp political jabs to emotional appeals, we'll break down the moments that made this debate one of the most talked about events in recent times. The stage was set for an unforgettable political clash. The dazzling lights illuminated the set of the Great American Debate, where millions of viewers across America were eagerly awaiting what would surely be a historic showdown. In one corner stood Karoline Leavitt, the youngest ever White House press secretary, fierce in her loyalty to the MAGA movement and eager to defend conservative values. With her confident demeanor and deep blue suit, Leavitt appeared ready to take on anything. She had proven herself in politics, and now, standing on this stage, she was prepared to defend the values she held dear, using intelligence and sharp wit. Across from her sat Taylor Swift, a pop icon known worldwide, not just for her chart-topping hits, but also for her outspoken advocacy on social issues. Swift's presence in the debate was a surprise. This was her first venture into the political arena, and she brought the emotional power of millions of fans who had long admired her for speaking out about women's rights, the environment, and equality. Swift wore an elegant white dress, her posture unwavering. She was ready to take on Leavitt with her passion for social change, aiming to use her platform to inspire and challenge the status quo. The tension in the air was palpable. Both figures represented two contrasting sides of the political spectrum: MAGA's conservative values versus liberal ideals championed by Swift. The audience could feel the divide as the two powerful women prepared to face off. Leavitt was expected to use her political experience to crush Swift's emotional arguments, while Swift's fans hoped she could overpower Leavitt's data-driven rebuttals with the raw force of her passion and influence. As the host energized the crowd, the first round of this historic clash began. The topic for the night was women's rights, a subject both women had strong opinions on, and each was prepared to defend her views. The audience roared with excitement, knowing they were about to witness a debate for the ages. Would Swift's emotional appeal win over the crowd, or would Leavitt's sharp logic and political experience prove to be too much for the pop star to handle? The stage lights dimmed, and the applause slowly faded as the host introduced the debate. The stakes were high, and the moment had arrived. With each word, these two women were not just debating. They were representing larger ideas about how women's rights should be approached in the modern world, and how best to achieve the equality they both desired for women everywhere. Before diving into the conversation, the host invited the audience to comment where they were watching from, and reminded them to subscribe so they wouldn't miss the latest stories. The tension was building, and the debate was about to begin in full force. Would it be politics versus culture? Conservative logic versus liberal emotion? The audience was about to find out. The debate kicked off with the first major topic: women's rights. The host turned to Taylor Swift, giving her the floor to make her opening argument. Swift stood, her white dress shimmering under the bright stage lights, and her eyes were filled with determination as she prepared to make her case. She had long been an advocate for women's rights, and she was ready to bring her passion for the cause into this political arena. Swift began, her voice steady, but with a touch of the emotional power she was known for. She thanked the host for the opportunity, and then dove into the heart of the issue. Women's rights aren't just an issue. They're the foundation of a just society, Swift declared, her words carrying the weight of everything she had fought for in her career. She spoke about how young girls, her fans, looked to role models to see what they could become, and how hurtful it was when they encountered policies that restricted women's freedom. Swift's words resonated with the audience, especially young women who clapped enthusiastically in agreement with her impassioned speech. She raised her hand, emphasizing her points as the cameras zoomed in on the audience, some even holding up signs that read, "Taylor for Equality." Phones lit up, capturing the moment as the debate heated up. With the stage set, Karoline Leavitt was next. She was poised, smiling confidently, and her sharp eyes were focused on Swift. Leavitt adjusted her microphone with the calm of someone who had faced much more challenging situations in her political career. She began with a compliment, acknowledging Swift's passion, but quickly shifted to challenge her argument. "Taylor, I truly admire your passion," Leavitt began with a slightly softer tone. "I love your song Fearless, but I don't need a song to prove women's strength. I live it every day." The audience, particularly those on the conservative side, erupted into laughter at Leavitt's witty remark. The MAGA supporters in the crowd cheered, clearly enjoying her sharp humor. Swift, though, raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting Leavitt's humorous approach to the issue. Leavitt continued, her tone now serious with the precision of a seasoned politician. "Taylor talks about equality, and I agree women deserve respect, but let's look at reality," she said. "At 27, I'm the youngest White House press secretary in history, appointed by President Trump. That's proof this administration gives women opportunities. Women's rights aren't just about words. They're about creating a strong economy and stable security so women can thrive." Leavitt paused for effect and delivered a compelling statistic. Under President Trump's administration, women's unemployment hit a record low before the pandemic, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The audience, particularly conservatives, responded with loud applause. Leavitt had made her point clearly. Her argument wasn't just about talking the talk. It was about tangible action that led to real-world results. She finished her statement by lightly raising her hand, asserting her authority, and the crowd responded with applause. Taylor Swift wasn't going to let this pass without a rebuttal. She quickly requested the floor, clearly ready to defend her position. "Karoline, I'm glad for your success," Swift said, her voice a bit more emotional this time as she stood tall. "But one example doesn't represent everyone." She spoke of the inequalities women still faced in wages, health care, and personal freedoms. She painted a picture of single mothers, young girls, and others who were suffering under restrictive policies. "We need leaders who are fighting for all women, not just a few," she said, her voice rising with passion. As Swift finished, the audience applauded, especially the younger women who had been moved by her emotional plea. But Leavitt, with the grace of a seasoned debater, was ready to counter. She stood, her expression cool but assertive. "Taylor, I respect your heart, but heart doesn't solve inequality," she began, her tone now a little more sarcastic, almost playful. "You talk about disadvantaged women, and I agree, we need to support them. But Trump's administration increased funding for women's vocational training, helping thousands of single mothers find stable jobs and health care." Leavitt continued, offering more statistics about how the administration lowered drug prices, making medical services more accessible to women. "We empowered women by creating a thriving economy, not by writing songs about it." The audience, especially conservatives, responded with raucous applause and cheers. A man in a MAGA hat even shouted, "Karoline, awesome." Leavitt's sharp wit had landed a powerful blow, leaving Swift momentarily stunned. The debate had taken an interesting turn. Leavitt was clearly using data to back up her points, and her humor was proving to be a valuable weapon. Swift, though caught off guard, wasn't backing down. She quickly raised her hand, requesting another chance to respond. Her words, however, were now delivered with a more urgent tone. "Karoline, I'm glad for your success, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But we need to think beyond individual examples. Women still face systemic issues. She repeated her message that women's rights were not just about one's own success, but about fighting for all women. She emphasized that leadership was needed that respected every woman's rights, not just a few. As Swift finished, the tension in the room was palpable. Leavitt's humor and data-driven approach had rattled Swift, but the pop star's emotional appeal still had its supporters. The stage was set for the next round of the debate, as the audience buzzed with excitement, unsure of who had gained the upper hand. Would Leavitt's statistics and sharp humor continue to dominate, or would Swift's raw emotion and personal connection to her audience help her find a way to regain control? The debate on women's rights was just the beginning, and the stakes were only rising. As the debate continued, the atmosphere grew even more charged. The first round on women's rights had set the stage for what promised to be a gripping exchange of ideas, but the next topic, misinformation, was bound to bring even more heat. The host turned to Taylor Swift, signaling her to present her stance on the subject. Swift stood tall, adjusting her mic, clearly prepared to tackle this crucial issue. The tension in the room was thick, and all eyes were on her. Swift, once again, leaned into the emotional power she was known for. She spoke about how misinformation had torn apart communities and families across the country. Misinformation is tearing our society apart, she began, her voice calm yet passionate. When leaders spread lies, from denying science to inciting division, they destroy trust. I've seen families argue over fake news, communities confused by false information about elections or health. Swift's words hit home for many, and the audience responded with an encouraging round of applause, particularly from her fans. They were drawn in by her plea for truth and transparency, as her voice rose in intensity, almost as if she were singing a ballad. As Swift concluded her impassioned speech, she raised her hand for emphasis, her eyes scanning the crowd, making sure her message landed. The crowd clapped, many of them holding up signs that read, "Taylor for Truth" and "Fight Fake News." Swift, knowing how much her voice could inspire, seemed to feed off the energy in the room, her confidence building with every word. But Karoline Leavitt was quick to respond, her smile unwavering and her demeanor cool, confident, and ready for battle. Leavitt stepped forward, twirling her mic as she surveyed the room. It was clear that she wasn't intimidated by Swift's emotional appeal. She had her own arsenal of sharp wit and logic, and she wasn't afraid to use it. "Taylor," Leavitt began, her voice gentle but with an edge of sarcasm, "I love how you connect people through your music. Reputation is a killer album, but writing a good story is easier than fact-checking, right?" The audience responded with laughter, many of the MAGA supporters finding humor in Leavitt's subtle jab. Swift, clearly caught off guard by the reference to her album, frowned slightly. But Leavitt didn't wait for her to recover. She pressed on, her voice firm and clear. "Misinformation doesn't just come from leaders, Taylor. It comes from all sides, including the liberal media you often support. A Stanford study shows fake news spreads because of emotion, not truth." Leavitt's argument was deliberate, calculated, and grounded in research. She wasn't just making a general statement, she was offering a concrete example. She continued, turning her attention to Swift's vast influence on social media. "As a star with millions of followers, one wrong post from you could cause chaos," she said. A pointed question following, "Have you ever shared something you later had to correct?" The audience was left in suspense, some neutrals nodding, others whispering, waiting for Swift to respond. The tone in the room had shifted. Leavitt's sharpness, backed by data and facts, was beginning to leave an impression, and Swift's emotional arguments, while powerful, were being called into question. Leavitt had presented a challenge, not just to Swift, but to the very concept of the influence that social media stars wield. Swift didn't back down. She quickly took the floor, her voice a little rushed, but still composed. "Karoline, I'm very careful with what I share. I work with a team to verify information," she began, trying to defend herself. But then she shifted the focus back to what she considered the larger problem: leaders like President Trump. But the bigger issue is when leaders like President Trump spread conspiracy theories about elections or science. Their words cause real harm. Swift said, trying to maintain her ground. However, her argument lacked the specificity that Leavitt had brought to the table. While Swift's words were undeniably emotional and passionate, she wasn't offering the hard-hitting data or facts that Leavitt had. The audience felt this shift. Some whispered, as if they were waiting for more substance behind Swift's claims. Leavitt, sensing the moment, smiled subtly, almost as if anticipating the response. She stepped closer to the mic, her voice lowering but becoming even sharper. "Taylor, being careful is good, but it's not enough," she began. "You talk about conspiracy theories, but do you remember when you shared a post about environmental policy and then deleted it because it was wrong?" The crowd reacted immediately. Leavitt had gone straight for the jugular, calling out Swift's own mistakes in real time. "That post reached millions," Leavitt continued, her voice cutting through the room. "Misinformation isn't just coming from leaders, it's coming from influencers like you." The audience roared with approval, especially from the conservatives, who were now rallying behind Leavitt's data-driven approach. Leavitt had struck a blow, and it was clear that she wasn't going to let Swift's emotional appeals go unchallenged. But Swift, though caught off guard, tried to respond, her voice rising as she shot back. "Karoline, I admit I can make mistakes, but I always correct them. Leaders must be held to a higher standard because their words shape the nation." But the time buzzer rang, cutting Swift off before she could elaborate further. The host, ever the professional, intervened, and with a bright smile declared, "Time's up, Miss Swift. Miss Leavitt, final response." Leavitt, without missing a beat, smiled and took the opportunity to land a final powerful jab. "Taylor, correcting mistakes is good," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "But preventing them is better. I'm here answering with truth and data. Want to fight fake news? Start by checking sources better, not just relying on emotion." The audience exploded with applause, many standing and cheering for Leavitt's incisive final words. It was clear who had won this round. Leavitt had not only defended her own position, but also exposed a glaring vulnerability in Swift's approach to misinformation. Swift, though, wasn't giving up easily. She had been outmatched in this round, but her resolve and passion for her causes were far from extinguished. As the applause thundered, the host signaled a break, and the debate moved on to the next topic, climate change. The atmosphere was electric, with many on social media already buzzing about the sharp contrast between the two debaters. Leavitt's humor and logic had captured the crowd's attention, but Swift's emotional power remained a formidable force. The stage was set for another intense clash. Would Swift be able to bounce back and regain momentum, or would Leavitt continue to dominate with data and humor? The audience couldn't wait to see what would happen next. The energy in the room was electric as the debate transitioned into its third topic, climate change. After two intense rounds, both candidates had revealed their styles. Taylor Swift, with her emotionally charged pleas for justice, and Karoline Leavitt, armed with data and biting sarcasm. The large screen behind them flashed with images of wildfires, flooding, and environmental destruction, visually reminding the audience of the stakes. The tension had not eased, it had only grown. The host stepped forward, his voice booming like a game show announcer. "Round 3. Climate change. Miss Swift, the stage is yours." The lights dimmed to a warm golden hue, representing a warming planet, adding symbolic weight to the discussion. Taylor Swift stood, her white dress sparkling under the spotlight, her face set with a look of steely determination. She had been rattled in the previous round, but this was her turf, a subject she'd spoken about passionately in the past. Her voice rang out, strong and confident, as though delivering a message to millions at one of her concerts. "Climate change is our greatest crisis," she declared. "I've seen wildfires destroy communities, floods submerge homes, and children worry about their future. This isn't a theory. It's a terrifying reality." Swift paused, her voice swelling like the chorus of a ballad. "We need to invest in clean energy, cut emissions, and protect the planet for the next generation. The current administration denies science and prioritizes profits over people. I'm calling for urgent action because we're running out of time." Her words echoed through the auditorium. Fans stood and clapped, waving signs like "Swift for Earth" and "Save Our Future." A girl in the audience shouted, "Taylor, save the planet." The camera zoomed in on Swift, her eyes filled with passion and a flicker of hope, as if willing the world to care more. Then the host turned to Karoline Leavitt, the conservative firebrand who had already drawn blood in the previous rounds. She rose slowly, confidently, a slight smirk on her face, as if she knew this was her moment to strike again. "Taylor, we can't stay up all night dreaming of green energy and forget American workers, right?" Leavitt quipped, cleverly referencing Swift's song, All Too Well. The crowd laughed, even some of Swift's fans unable to hold back their amusement. Leavitt stepped into the spotlight, her voice clear and commanding. "Climate change is an important discussion, but solutions like the Green New Deal, which you support, do more harm than good." She dove into specifics, citing the American Energy Institute, which claimed a full shift to green energy could raise electricity prices by 30%, hurting middle-class families the most. She didn't stop there. The oil and gas industry, which you call science-denying, supports over 10 million American jobs, per the Department of Labor. Trump's administration focused on domestic energy production, reducing our foreign dependence, and keeping fuel prices stable. That's how you balance growth and environmental responsibility. The audience clapped loudly, with MAGA supporters rising to their feet. A man shouted, "Karoline, spot on." Even some neutrals nodded in appreciation of her command of the numbers. Swift, not one to shrink from a fight, quickly asked for a rebuttal. "Karoline, you talk about jobs, but we can't sacrifice the planet for short-term profits. Clean energy creates millions of new jobs. I've met scientists and young activists who say we have little time left. We must act now." Her tone was urgent, but again her lack of specific data began to show. She leaned into passion, her strength, but the audience had now grown accustomed to Leavitt's fact-driven jabs. Some in the crowd began to whisper, expecting Swift to offer numbers, not just feeling. Leavitt stepped back to the mic, and this time, she went in for a clean hit. "Taylor, I respect your heart, truly, but heart doesn't pay bills." Her tone dropped, becoming sharp and deliberate. "You talk about clean energy jobs. Per the Department of Labor, those jobs often pay less than oil and gas. Did the scientists you met explain how to overhaul the economy without spiking energy prices? Or did they just sing anti-hero to forget the problem?" The audience burst into laughter. Even some of Swift's supporters chuckled. Swift blushed, clearly caught off guard again by Leavitt's razor-sharp mix of facts and pop culture burns. Swift tried to push back. Her voice rose emotionally. "Karoline, you can laugh, but this is about survival. The planet is dying, and we need leaders who care, not ones who protect oil companies." But before she could continue, Leavitt raised her hand, requesting a rebuttal and smoothly cutting her off. The audience loved it. "Taylor, you say the planet's dying. Do you have any data proving the Green New Deal will stop it?" Leavitt said, her voice sharp and unwavering. Per the Environmental Protection Agency, Trump's administration reduced CO2 emissions while growing the economy. That's how you do it. Balance. Leadership. Not fantasies. She concluded with a powerful statement. "If you really want to save the planet, start by understanding the American workers your policies would hurt." The room erupted. Applause thundered from every corner. One woman stood and shouted, "Karoline, she's done." Swift sat down, visibly tense, her hands smoothing the fabric of her dress, her eyes distant. The pressure was mounting, and she knew this round hadn't gone her way. Leavitt, on the other hand, sat calmly, sipping water with the same confidence she had since the debate began. The host stepped in, still beaming with showmanship. "Round 3 was thrilling. Miss Leavitt, your final words." Leavitt stood once more, voice steady and sharp. "Taylor, your albums sell millions, and I admire that. But politics isn't a stage. It needs truth, not just emotion. You want to save the planet? I want to save both the planet and the American people." The crowd stood in applause. Some neutrals who had been uncertain began to lean toward Leavitt. On X, formerly Twitter, hashtags like #LeavittDestroysSwift and #TaylorNeedsData started trending. One viral post read, "Taylor writes hits, but Karoline lands political hits." As the host called for a short break before the final round, audience questions, the room buzzed with conversation. Swift sipped water quietly, regrouping. Leavitt, still smiling, still confident. After round 3, it was clear. The political newcomer had scored another major win. The debate returned from its third break, and the atmosphere was electric. The stage glowed under the spotlight of a fiery red hue, signifying the final and perhaps most unpredictable segment of the night: audience questions. After 3 intense rounds on women's rights, misinformation, and climate change, this was the moment for the public to speak. No scripts, no rehearsal. Just raw, unfiltered questions from everyday Americans to 2 cultural and political giants. The host, brimming with excitement, strode to the center of the stage like a ring announcer before the final round of a title fight. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the final round. Miss Swift, Miss Leavitt, are you ready?" The crowd roared in anticipation. He raised a stack of cards, each containing a question submitted by a live audience member. "Who's asking first?" he called out, scanning the crowd. A young woman in the front row stood up, wearing a Swifty for Change t-shirt. The camera zoomed in as she nervously held the mic. "Miss Swift, I'm a big fan. My question is, how can pop culture help promote unity in politics?" Taylor Swift, energized by the support, rose to her feet, her face brightening. This was a question that played to her strengths, connecting people through art and emotion. She adjusted her mic, her voice warm, composed, and hopeful. "Thank you for that question. I truly believe pop culture has the power to connect people from every walk of life." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Music, movies, and storytelling, they create empathy. I've seen it happen firsthand at my concerts. People from completely different backgrounds singing together, finding common ground. If we can bring that spirit into politics, more listening, more compassion, we can build unity. Art isn't just entertainment, it's a bridge. As she finished, the crowd erupted in applause, especially the younger audience members, many of whom held up signs like "Swift for Unity" and "Art Heals Divides." The camera captured Swift's expression, genuine, emotional, and hopeful. But now it was Karoline Leavitt's turn. The host turned to her with a smile. "Miss Leavitt, your response?" Leavitt stood with the same unwavering confidence she displayed all night. She twirled her mic slightly, locking eyes with the crowd. "Taylor, I love how you connect people through music. Reputation is a killer album, but Unity can't just be a song, right?" The crowd chuckled at the clever callback. Even some Swift fans couldn't help but smile. Pop culture is inspiring, absolutely, but it doesn't put food on the table. It doesn't pay rent. Real unity, lasting unity, comes from policy that works. From lowering gas prices, creating jobs, keeping neighborhoods safe. Leavitt paused, then leaned in with conviction. "Under President Trump, we created 7 million jobs before the pandemic. That lifted up families across all communities. That's real unity, not slogans, not songs, but security." The audience clapped, especially MAGA supporters. A man in a red hat shouted, "Karoline, exactly." Swift remained poised, but the contrast was clear: emotional vision versus pragmatic execution. The next question came from a middle-aged man wearing a MAGA hat. The host nodded to him. "This one's for Miss Leavitt. How does the administration protect workers from liberal policies like the Green New Deal?" Leavitt's eyes lit up. This was her comfort zone. She smiled. "Thank you for the question. The Trump administration protects workers by prioritizing American energy independence and cutting stifling regulations." She continued confidently. "The Green New Deal, which Miss Swift supports, could raise electricity prices by 30%, per the American Energy Institute. That would crush middle and working class families. Under President Trump, we boosted oil and gas production, created over 10 million energy jobs, and kept fuel prices stable. That's how we protect the American worker, not with idealism, but with results." Applause burst out again. Some supporters stood and whistled. It was clear she had struck another chord. The host turned to Swift for a response. She stood, her tone still composed, though her eyes showed a flicker of tension. "Karoline, I understand your concern for jobs, but we can't ignore the climate crisis just to protect fossil fuels. Clean energy creates millions of jobs too. I've met young people dedicating their lives to saving the planet. They believe in change, and I do too." Her voice was sincere, but the audience murmured. Some leaned in, others whispered. Where were the stats, the studies, the counterpoints? Leavitt requested a rebuttal, already anticipating the moment. "Taylor, you talk about clean energy jobs, but per the Department of Labor, those jobs often pay less than oil and gas. And you say you've met activists, But do you have any data proving the Green New Deal won't cost millions of workers their livelihoods? Laughter rippled through the crowd. Swift blinked, lips pressed, caught once more without solid evidence. Then came the final question, from a neutral young woman in the audience. She stood, holding a notepad and speaking with clarity. This one's for both of you. What do you think about the role of women in politics today? Swift answered first. Her voice carried that signature strength and sensitivity. I believe women need to be heard, not just on stage, but in Congress, in the White House, in every space where decisions are made. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. I want young girls to grow up knowing they can change the world, not by fitting in, but by standing out. Applause followed, warm and supportive. But now came Leavitt, ready to make her final impression. She stepped forward, her tone sharp but respectful. Taylor, I agree. Women need to lead. But they don't need a stage to be powerful. They need action. She raised her hand for emphasis. I'm here. Not just talking, not just singing, but working. I'm the youngest White House press secretary in history. That's not symbolic. That's real. Women belong in leadership, but we need to lead with truth, strength, and substance, not just emotion. The debate's final bell had rung. The audience erupted in applause, some standing, some cheering, and some simply stunned. The stage lights dimmed as the host stepped forward, visibly energized. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a historic debate. Thank you, Miss Swift. Thank you, Miss Leavitt. And thank you all. Swift clapped, offering the audience a strange, pensive smile, composed but clearly worn from the verbal gauntlet. Leavitt stood tall, smiling broadly, waving to the crowd like a champion. Backstage, the tension lingered. Swift and Leavitt exchanged a brief, professional handshake. You were very sharp, Karoline, Swift offered quietly. Thanks for stepping up, Taylor. This was a big stage, Leavitt replied with a confident grin. Then they turned, walking in opposite directions like two fighters retreating to their corners. Swift, entering her dressing room, scrolled through social media. Her face tightened. Posts read, Karoline Leavitt just schooled Taylor Swift in politics, and, Taylor, bring data next time. She sighed, quietly strategizing her comeback. Meanwhile, Leavitt, surrounded by aides, smiled as she received congratulatory texts from Trump's team. We did it, she whispered to an assistant. Her star was rising, and she knew it. The fallout from the Great American Debate was instant, viral, and absolutely seismic. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, social media platforms exploded. On X, formerly Twitter, hashtags like Leavitt destroys Swift, Taylor needs data, and MAGA Queens surged to the top of the trending list. Memes, reaction videos, and commentary flooded the timeline. Conservative users cheered Karoline Leavitt's performance, hailing her as a rising star of the Republican Party, while Swift's loyal fan base scrambled to offer support and defend their icon's passion. One viral post captured the mood. Taylor may write hits, but Karoline lands political hits. Leavitt destroys Swift. Conservative media outlets wasted no time taking victory laps. Breitbart published a bold headline, Leavitt obliterates Swift, MAGA has a new star. The article praised Leavitt's sharp, data-backed rebuttals, her humor, and her ability to dismantle Swift's arguments with precision. They dubbed her the Queen of the Debate, comparing her to a political prizefighter who walked into the ring and knocked out a pop star trying to play politician. On Fox News, anchors and commentators flooded the screen, some even calling the debate a defining moment for conservative women in America. One political analyst said, Karoline didn't just win a debate, she redefined how Republican women communicate. She was smart, prepared, and lethal. Meanwhile, liberal-leaning outlets scrambled to recalibrate. CNN aired a segment titled, Taylor Swift bravely faces Leavitt, but lacks political experience. The piece struck a balance, acknowledging Swift's shortcomings in data and policy knowledge while emphasizing her moral clarity and passion for change. The narrative was clear. Swift may have lost the argument, but she had not lost her relevance or influence. Vogue ran a softer take, publishing a feature titled, Taylor Swift, a spark of inspiration in a divided America. It framed her appearance as courageous and historic, noting how her presence alone had encouraged millions of young women to take an interest in politics. Even in defeat, it read, Swift sparked something powerful. And her fans? They were devoted and defiant. Taylor Fights Back began trending hours after the debate, with fans sharing clips of her speaking about truth, unity, climate change, and women's rights. They praised her vulnerability, her strength under pressure, and her willingness to step into the lion's den. One fan posted, "Taylor may not have had all the facts, but she had heart, and sometimes that's what moves people the most." Another added, "Taylor, bring data next time. We got your back." Amidst the buzz, Taylor Swift took to Instagram with a poised response. She posted a photo of herself on stage, mid-speech, accompanied by a long, heartfelt caption. "Today was a big challenge. I stepped into the great American debate to speak for what I believe in, women's rights, truth, and our planet. I may not have won every argument, but I learned a lot. Thank you, Karoline Leavitt, for a fierce debate, and thank you all for listening. We keep fighting." The post garnered millions of likes within hours. Fans flooded the comments. "Taylor, you're our queen. Then, now, always. So proud of you for standing up. Let's get you debate ready for next time." But not all the feedback was adoration. Some neutral followers and moderates left honest reflections. "Next time, bring data to back the passion." This was brave, but politics isn't the Grammys. Meanwhile, over in the Leavitt camp, the mood was nothing short of celebratory. The very next morning, Karoline Leavitt appeared at a White House press briefing, glowing with confidence in her signature deep blue suit. Reporters grilled her about the debate and her now iconic takedowns. She smiled, cool and professional. "Taylor Swift was a formidable opponent," she said. "I respect her for stepping into the political arena. But at the end of the day, politics requires truth and action, not just emotion. That's what I brought to the stage." When asked whether she'd do a rematch, Leavitt chuckled. "If Taylor wants, I'm always ready." The quip went viral, instantly turned into GIFs, TikToks, and sound bites. The Swift rematch hashtag began picking up steam. Over on Truth Social, former President Donald Trump posted, "Karoline Leavitt made MAGA proud last night. A huge win. Smart, sharp, and a future leader." Her team erupted in celebration. Staffers and political allies sent congratulatory messages, with one aide whispering, "She just made history." The cultural ripple effects extended far beyond the debate stage. College campuses began hosting political discussions and town halls, dissecting the debate as a case study in style versus substance, passion versus preparation. Professors discussed Leavitt and Swift as archetypes of two powerful forces in public life: data-driven leadership versus emotionally driven advocacy. One political science professor told his class, "Leavitt represents policy precision and logic. Swift represents emotion and culture. But both, in their own way, can inspire people to care." On TikTok, clips from the debate, especially Leavitt's zingers and Swift's emotional pleas, went insanely viral. One TikToker created a mashup titled "When Pop Meets Politics," highlighting the contrast in their styles, soundtracked by a slowed remix of Swift's "You Belong With Me." The media couldn't stop talking. This wasn't just a debate, it had become a moment in modern culture, a reflection of America's ideological divide. But in its own strange way, it had sparked something unexpected, a renewed interest in civic discourse. Leavitt was now being heralded as the Swift Slayer, the MAGA maverick, and even Trump's protege. Her fan base grew overnight. She was invited on multiple conservative news shows, podcasts, and even teased as a future VP candidate. Swift, on the other hand, wasn't down for the count. Though clearly outmaneuvered, she had shown bravery by even stepping into that arena. And for millions of people, especially young women, that still mattered. In the end, the public remained divided. Who won? Depends on whom you ask. But one thing was clear. The debate didn't just make headlines. It made history. As the dust began to settle from the explosive debate between Karoline Leavitt and Taylor Swift, the impact wasn't just political. It was cultural, emotional, and deeply symbolic of the division in modern America. The echoes of the debate continued to ripple outward, not just in headlines and hashtags, but in homes, schools, workplaces, and campuses. Social media remained a battlefield. On X, the trending hashtag #LeavittDestroysSwift was still climbing, but so too were others like Taylor Inspires, Truth and Emotion, and Culture versus Policy. Commentators, influencers, students, and average citizens continued to weigh in on what had taken place on that glowing stage. It wasn't just a debate. It had become a national mirror, reflecting back the ideological and emotional divide that defines America today. The conversation had shifted from who won to what does this mean? People began reflecting on the symbolism of the event. Leavitt and Swift weren't just two public figures, they were avatars. Avatars of reason and emotion, policy and passion, pragmatism and idealism. Their confrontation wasn't merely a debate over hot-button issues like climate change, misinformation, and women's rights. It was a representation of two different ways of thinking, two visions of how the country should be led. Across media outlets and classrooms, thought leaders began framing the event as a defining moment. On college campuses, professors in political science, communications, and gender studies began using the debate as a teaching moment. In one university roundtable, a professor explained to her class, "Leavitt embodies policy-minded leadership rooted in facts and numbers. Swift represents cultural influence shaped by empathy and inspiration. Neither is inherently superior, both are essential to how our society functions. But when they collide, it exposes the fault lines in how we define leadership, power, and truth." Debate watch parties, originally intended as fun social events, turned into full-on forums for civic discussion. Students broke into groups to analyze specific segments, comparing Leavitt's use of economic statistics with Swift's emotional appeals to justice and unity. Some argued that Swift, despite being outmatched in traditional debate metrics, won the hearts of millions with her bravery. Others applauded Leavitt's discipline, sharpness, and command of the facts, saying she raised the bar for public discourse. On TikTok, users created short documentary-style edits, layering key moments of the debate with powerful audio tracks, some dramatic, others satirical. In one popular clip, Leavitt's now viral line, "Politics isn't a stage, it needs truth, not just emotion," was placed over black and white footage of old campaign speeches and modern protests. Another featured a montage of Swift's emotional expressions during the debate, set to the instrumental of her song The Archer, captioned, "She didn't win the debate, but she made us feel something." Then came the media think pieces. The Huffington Post published a deep dive titled, "The Battle of Emotion versus Reason, What Leavitt versus Swift Tells Us About America." The article didn't declare a winner. Instead, it asked readers to consider how both women symbolize the dual needs of a functioning democracy, policy that works and passion that inspires. It highlighted the dangers of dismissing either side entirely and how doing so only deepens division. In more moderate circles, there was a clear call for balance. One prominent centrist columnist wrote, "If Leavitt is the architect, Swift is the heart. We need both. One without the other builds either a house with no soul or a dream with no foundation." There was also growing awareness of how media itself contributed to the polarization. Breitbart's triumphalist framing of Leavitt and CNN's attempt to rescue Swift both drew criticism. Commentators asked, "Are we analyzing the debate or projecting our biases onto it? Is every public confrontation now just more fuel for the tribal fires of left versus right?" An ex-user summed it up in a viral post, "We're so busy choosing sides that we're missing the real opportunity, learning from both." The most poignant takeaway came from a rising TikTok creator, a high school civics teacher who stitched together highlights of both women's best moments, writing, "Leavitt was prepared, Swift was brave. One brought answers, the other brought heart. That debate wasn't about who won, it was a mirror. What did you see in it?" In classrooms, church groups, community centers, and even family dinners, people began having uncomfortable but necessary conversations. They asked, can truth and empathy coexist in political discourse? Why do we pit emotion and data against each other instead of blending them? And most importantly, what kind of leaders do we want in the future? The answer for many began to take shape, not as a binary, but as a spectrum. This wasn't just about Karoline Leavitt or Taylor Swift anymore. It had grown into a civic conversation about the nature of leadership and whether America's next generation of voices could learn to bridge the gap between the rigor of facts and the power of feeling. The debate had ended, but the dialogue it sparked was just beginning. The final wave of the Leavitt versus Swift debate wasn't just a flurry of headlines or a weekend trend. It became a lasting reflection of the times we live in. A moment where the power of pop collided with the pulse of politics in front of millions. And when the dust finally began to settle, it was clear this debate wasn't just about two women on a stage. It was a reflection of the soul of a divided nation, with each voice representing a different kind of truth. On social media, platforms like X, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube had become battlegrounds of analysis and commentary. The hashtag Leavitt vs. Swift had generated millions of impressions, and people were no longer just debating who won. They were dissecting what the debate meant for everything from gender roles in politics to how data and emotion should coexist in public discourse. Clips from the debate, Leavitt's sharp policy comebacks, and Swift's heartfelt declarations circulated endlessly. One split-screen TikTok showed Swift speaking emotionally about young women's hopes, while Leavitt, in another window, countered with a stoic line about job creation and economic impact. The caption read, "Truth and heart, why we need both." A newly released poll showed the public split nearly 50-50 on who they sided with in the debate, but nearly 70% of respondents agreed on one thing. This debate made them think more critically about politics. In the days that followed, the media world responded with retrospectives, podcast deep dives, and even satirical sketches. But the conversation among regular people, the young voters, the new moms, the high school students, the political independents, was what truly mattered. In suburban classrooms, teachers began incorporating the debate into their civics curriculum, showing students how discourse, disagreement, and perspective-taking can happen, even when it gets messy. In church basements and coffee shop book clubs, people gathered to talk not about who was right, but about what kind of future they wanted to build. Some praised Leavitt as the embodiment of a new conservative energy, a young woman who could go toe-to-toe with a global celebrity and win, not through intimidation, but by mastering her facts, her tone, and her timing. Others stood firmly behind Swift, arguing that while she might not have won the debate by traditional measures, she represented something equally important: the courage to speak from the heart in a space designed to dismiss feelings as weakness. Major outlets like The Atlantic and The New Yorker began referring to the debate as a watershed moment in American media, where pop culture, politics, and personality collided in a way we hadn't seen since maybe Reagan or Oprah on the campaign trail. One professor wrote in a post-debate editorial, "Karoline Leavitt showed that reason, data, and composure still matter." Taylor Swift reminded us that emotion, empathy, and visibility matter just as much. But perhaps the biggest lesson is this: neither one is enough on their own. As the nation moved forward, both women emerged changed. Karoline Leavitt was quickly embraced as a new face of conservative power. She was invited to major political conferences, asked to guest host segments on Fox News, and even whispered about as a potential vice presidential candidate if the next election lined up right. Swift, on the other hand, took the response in stride. She continued advocating for voter registration, social justice, and climate action. More importantly, she listened to the criticism, acknowledging the need to match her passion with policy knowledge. She started scheduling time with political advisors, reportedly preparing for future advocacy appearances with a strategy built on both heart and research. Even Swift's team posted a statement in the days after the debate: "We learned a lot, and next time we'll be ready to lead not just with compassion, but with the facts that fuel it." By the end of the week, a new phrase began circulating among both fans and critics alike: Leavitt won the debate, Swift won the conversation. And perhaps that's the truest takeaway of all. This wasn't just a political debate, it was a cultural clash, a media moment, and a national reflection rolled into one. From fiery rebuttals to emotional appeals, from data drops to unexpected humility, Leavitt versus Swift gave us more than entertainment. It gave us a reason to think, to reflect, and to engage. And the best part? This is only the beginning. Because whether you're team facts, team feelings, or somewhere in between, you know there's more to come. More debates, more showdowns, more moments that challenge us to ask, what kind of country do we want to be? So, if you found this video thought-provoking, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay with us. We've got more political fire, cultural clashes, and unexpected showdowns coming your way. Thank you. See you in the next video.